Today we're going to be working on solving polynomials that are in factored form and also in using our area model to remove the greatest common factor to get our polynomial into factored form. So let's just look really quickly at the difference between a polynomial in standard form and a polynomial in factored form. In standard form, our terms are listed by the highest degree of the exponent down to the very lowest degree of exponents. So that's our standard form polynomial. Our factored form polynomial is written as two terms that when you multiply them together give you a product. So our factored form, we've got it down to the two factors or three factors, whatever it is, that when you multiply it together will get you back to the standard form polynomial. So we're going to look at some polynomials that are already in factored form and start exploring how to solve them. So we're going to solve them using something that's called the zero product property. So let's just think for a minute. If I gave you this equation, x times y equals 0. I want you to think, what could you say for sure about this equation? What could you say for sure about the x or the y? Well, the zero product property is saying that one of these has to be a 0. If you multiply two factors together, at least one of them has to be a 0. So we're going to use that zero product property in order to solve these factored equations. So let's just start with number 1. Number 1, if we kind of think about it just the same as that x times y equals 0, one of these two factors, for sure we can say one of these two factors has to equal 0. So to solve this, what we're going to do is set each factor to 0 and solve each factor for x. So I'm going to set my first factor. My first factor is just plain old x. I'm going to set it equal to 0. Now I'm going to take my second factor, x plus 5, and set it equal to 0. And then I'm going to solve each equation for x, and that's going to give me my two solutions to this polynomial. So I'm going to subtract 5 on both sides, and I come up with x equals -5. So my solution to number 1 is x equals 0 and x equals -5. I could write it in that form. I could also use brackets. I could write it as 0, comma, -5 in brackets, or I could write them as two x-intercepts. I could write them as 0, comma, 0 and -5, comma, 0. So any one of these three formats gives me the same thing. My solution, it's just three different ways to write it. I can write it as x equals, that's how I did it first. I can write it as a data set in brackets of my two x values, or I could turn around and write them as ordered pairs. And my ordered pairs are saying my y is 0 each time, and this is my value of x when my y is 0. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at number 2. Number 2, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve it. So I want you to pause your video and solve number 2 and write your answer. You can write it in any of the three forms. You can put it in x equals, you can put it as a data set, or you could write it as ordered pairs. So pause your video, solve number 2, and then come back for the explanation. Okay, shouldn't have had any problems coming up with c equals 2 and c equals -1. I'm going to let you go ahead and get some practice on doing number 3, 4, and 5 on your own. But before you pause your video, a couple of words of thought. On number 4, you're going to have 3 factors, so 3 equations equal to 0. And on number 5, before you even start trying to solve this, let's go ahead and rewrite our base. Instead of a base squared, let's go ahead and rewrite it as the x minus 3 equals 0. So go ahead and solve 3, 4, and 5. Pause your video while you're doing it, and then turn it back on to check your answers. Okay, so when you're looking at your answers, a couple of things to notice is on number 4, we had 3 answers. I put them in a data set. And on number 5, because our x equals 3 was just a repeated root, my answer is only x equals 3. I only write it once.